Long times ago, people asked to a sage, "What's the biggest mistake we make in life?" He replied, "The biggest mistake is you think you have time." None of us are perfect. Making mistakes is an inevitable part of human life. Mistakes vary. It is from simply forgetting an appointment, charging the cell phone, replying to work emails in time, or posting birthday wishes on Facebook friends. Some other mistakes are from our attitude, such as caring too much about what other people think and arguing with loved ones all the time, not telling someone how it truly felt. And other mistakes are from ignoring health when we are healthy or not exercising enough. So another mistake is from trying to live without making a mistake. Something happens all the time in life. Making mistakes come when we act or react in daily life and when we make a decision or judgment. We might reduce our mistakes if we stay on our bed 24/7. And also, I think experiencing failures is an inevitable part of human life, too. But making mistakes and experiencing failures are different. While a mistake can lead to failure, they do not always have to end in failure. I know I make numerous mistakes each week, each day, but many of them don't cause serious consequences. A failure doesn't always have to stem from a mistake. And also, people can still fail without a mistake. Failure is a relative term. We see failure means different things to different people. What could be a failure for some could be a success for others. We could fail and succeed every day, several times. A few failures have a significantly longer-term impact on us or change our life or family forever. In the Bible, it is not difficult to find the stories of failure. I think there are more stories of failures or mistakes than the success in the Bible. From the stories of first human beings in the book of Genesis to the stories of the disciples and early churches in New Testament, Bible is talking about failures. Bible doesn't hide them. Through our new sermon series, we will explore those stories and find out God's wisdom together. The first hero of failure in this series is Moses. Other than Jesus, this man might be the most well-known character from the Bible. Moses played multiple roles throughout his life. To people of Israel, this man is the most important prophet and their liberator. He's a main character and partner of God who led the Hebrews out of Egypt and talked to God face to face. He gave the laws in Torah, the first 5 books of Hebrew Bible, and the gospel and Paul's letters in New Testament constantly comparing Jesus with Moses and Jesus' teaching with Moses' laws. So without understanding influence and shadow of Moses and his teaching, and it is hard to understand why Jesus and his teaching offended the scribes and religious authorities of Jerusalem in his time, and why they hated him and why the crowd shouted, "Crucify him." The book of Exodus is one of the most fascinating books in Old Testament. The story of Moses begins there. So we will explore the early days of his life through this message. Moses was born in a Hebrew family in Egypt. Exodus chapter 1 explains when a new king arose over Egypt, he was afraid of the Hebrew slaves because there were so many of them. One day the king ordered all the Hebrew boy babies to be killed. The Bible says Hebrew midwives disobeyed the Pharaoh and saved the baby boys and lied to their king. Moses' mom saved her baby too. She hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him anymore, she made a little basket boat, placed him in it, and she hid it in the leaves of the banks of the Nile River. Baby Moses didn't stay there long before being rescued by the daughter of Pharaoh. She quickly knew the baby is one of Hebrew slaves. When the baby was crying, the Bible says, this princess took pity on him. Moses' big sister Miriam stood at a distance to see what would happen to her baby brother. She dared to reveal herself to the princess and told her that she can get her a Hebrew woman who can nurse the baby for her. The Pharaoh's daughter said yes to her. So Miriam came back to her home and bring her mother, who is also the mother of the baby, in front of the princess. I think she was so brilliant. The princess said, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll give you your wages." So Moses' mom took the child. The Bible says, when the child grew up, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son, a prince of Egypt, and she named him Moses. This is a fascinating story. It inspired Hollywood movie directors. I think I watched at least 3 different movies about Moses. The first one was when I was 10 years old. My mom took me to a theater and watched Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments. It was my first Bible movie. I was almost shocked. When I came home, I opened my story Bible and found Moses' story. That was the first time I read the Bible by myself. I found the movie connect dots between the episodes of Moses in the Bible and dramatized his life. Well, let's go back to the next story of Moses in the book of Exodus. This book doesn't say how old Moses was when he was brought back to the princess. It was wrong enough for him to equip his Hebrew identity. Verse 11 calls Hebrew slaves as his people twice. It says, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Wait a minute, did Moses kill a man? Was he a murderer? A criminal? Yes, he was. Moses killed that person beating his people. That Egyptian might be one of supervisors or officers. Moses didn't kill the man when he was beating that Hebrew slave. He watched it and waited until nobody sees. Then he killed the man and hid the body. It was kind of an assassination. It was a capital crime. Moses thought it was perfect crime. Nobody knows. But it was an epic fail. In verse 13, when he, Moses, went out the next day, he saw 2 Hebrews fighting, and he said to the one who was in the wrong, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" He answered, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." Moses figured out absolutely the situation is going wrong. He is accused by his own people, whom he wants to protect and save, and Moses might not think too much about how do they know about it. The worst part in this situation is from the first reaction of the Hebrews. Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Think about, he is a prince of Egypt who has power and authority. It was an ancient time, at least 3,400 years ago in Egypt. Their king Pharaoh was identified with a god or son of God. The king has ownership of the land, property, slaves, and citizens. The king has power to kill people or forgive them. It is not hard to imagine that the privilege of the royal family besides the king. That's who Moses, a prince of Egypt, is. How could a slave speak against him? How could one of his people whom he tried to protect to do that? The refusal of Hebrews made Moses have the second thought about the Hebrews. It might be his mistake to claim them as his people. The Bible doesn't give us the details about the situation. Thus, my imagination says Moses' crime was more than a homicide. Think about it. If a prince killed a man, what would the king do? The king should protect the royal family with all his power. But in verse 15, when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. So Moses fled from the Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian. What Moses did looks like a political rebellion. The king of Egypt came to know that, and Moses is a threat. Or finally, he found a political justification to remove him. There are not many options in front of Moses. He runs away. Because we know the entire story from hindsight, how the story ends. We can approach to Moses' story from a couple of different perspectives. First, we can read his story from understanding his character. Through the overall episode of Moses in Exodus, we know Moses is introverted, such a kind of withdrawing type person. He seems to naturally prefer to observe and process before he acts. Moses seems to fit the type 9 in Enneagram. It is said they are internally disengaged from what is going on around them. When they act, their engagement is slow and deliberate. In contrast, they can also be inactive or appear to be biding their name and then suddenly be sparkled into doing something non-stop. I think this description fits very well to Moses. The character of this type helps us understand better Moses' behavior and reactions in his story. For example, in chapter 3, we can find the moment God called Moses. In verse 10, "So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Moses is deliberate. His engagement is slow. It takes a while for God to persuade him to go. And Moses is too much deliberate. Later, we know that he didn't jump into the promised land with his people. He watched the land for almost 40 years. He sent spies first. Finally, he passed the baton to Joshua to lead the people there. Moses himself never made it. He might not be your favorite type of person or leader, but in the Bible, he's God's favorite. God chose him. God even made his mistake a journey toward the success. Before he led his people to the wilderness, Moses had a chance to explore the entire land for 40 years. Moses is the most favorite prophet to also the descendants of Israel. He's the main character of the Hebrew Bible. The Bible is from the hindsight, not foresight. So most part of the Bible is the wisdom learning from the past. Even the apocalyptic visions are from hindsight. People of Israel revisited this story again and again. They found what they missed. They gained different perspectives to read the stories. They reinterpret them. That's how we Christians do too. From the story of Moses, we find more than Moses' mistakes and failure. We can hear how New Testament interprets the early days of Moses from Stephen's sermon in the book of Acts. In chapter 7, Stephen says, Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of Egyptian and was powerful in his words and deeds. It is a very interesting interpretation. In the book of Exodus, Moses humbly lowered himself, saying, "Oh, my Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." But here, in the book of Acts, Moses is described as one who was powerful in his words and deeds. Was Moses eloquent and powerful in his speech, as said in the book of Acts, or he was not? Which side is true? To me, both interpretation might be true. Moses was once a man of power. It is not hard to imagine that the privilege, pride, power, and authority of a prince of Egypt in the ancient time. His words and speech had power and authority. He might think to use his privilege to save his own people. Then he made a big mistake. He is rejected by his own people. His king pursued his life. I assume the situation broke his spirit, made him lost confidence. It might become a trauma forever whenever he tried to speak in front of people. Who knows? The point of the book of Acts is that the rejection of the Hebrews in Exodus chapter 2 is the mistake of the Hebrews, not Moses. Stephen compared it with how Jerusalem rejected Jesus. There's a textual proof about Stephen's point in the book of Exodus. In chapter 12, it says, the time that Israelites had lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the companies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. 430 is a weird number in the Bible. In the Bible, number 40 is used a lot because 40 signifies a period of time to complete a life cycle, one generation, and change or transformation. Do you remember Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days? And Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years. Do you know how many years King David ruled Israel? 40 years. Most of their favorite kings in the history of Israel ruled 40 years. Also, 40 is used as symbol of God's judgment. The reign of the great flood in the history of Noah lasted 40 days and nights. And Moses fasted for 40 days and nights to prepare himself to receive the law. And all we know, human gestation period for new life is 9 months, which is around 40 weeks. Why not 400 years instead of 430? Do you know people of Israel believe God's original plan was 400 years too? In Genesis 15, there's a God's promise to Abram. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs and shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions." 400 years was God's promise, God's plan. It must be kept, right? But it took 430 years. Was it God's mistake? Did God count wrong, or did God fail to rescue them in 400 years? The book of Exodus doesn't explain why it took longer than God's plan. Instead, book of Acts gives us a clue. It is because people of Israel rejected Moses when he was younger. When he was rejected by his own people, young Moses left Egypt and became an alien in the wilderness. He lived there for 40 years until God called him back to continue the rescue mission. For those 40 years, Israelites had to continue living as slaves. What if they didn't reject Moses 40 years ago? What if Exodus happened at that time, their period of slavery and suffering might be much shortened, and God's rescue mission could be done within 400 years. That the Hebrews rejected Moses was their epic fail. That's what Stephen is talking about in the book of Acts. The story of Exodus consists of actually everyone's mistakes. Moses thought his people would accept him as their leader, but even he killed their enemy. It was an epic fail. Before then, the act of Pharaoh's daughter, who said Moses was an epic fail to her father, king of Egypt. She fed a wolf. And Hebrew slaves who rejected Moses didn't know their behavior is going to elongate their slavery for another 40 years. I think God made a mistake too. 400 years plan in God's calendar failed because people rejected Moses. Yes, everyone made mistakes, but not everything was in total failure. It took a little longer, but God finally liberated Hebrew people from the hands of Egyptians. Moses became the greatest liberator, prophet, and ruler of Israel in their history. Pharaoh's daughter is remembered forever as a part of God's plan with her compassion and discernment. And one who failed completely might be the king of Egypt, who kicked away all kinds of options and opportunities God offered to him through Moses. He lost lots of things as a consequence. Lots of his people's life lost because of the decision of their leader. One well-known preacher said, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. Is that right? Because I also heard the exactly opposite ratio saying life is 90% of what happens to us and 10% how we react to it. I feel I am somewhere between 90% and 10%. It depends on how harsh the world I live is. People of Israel who lived as slaves didn't have many options in life. Their life was 90% what happened to them, but they still had a chance to react to it, and they kicked it away. Moses, a prince of Egypt, had many options and choices in life. It took a while to choose the way. He learned from his mistakes and chose the right one. What is happening to your life? What already happened? You may not control what is happening. You cannot control what already happened. What you can control is how to react to it and how to respond to it now. There's no real right or wrong answer to how we should react to failure or handle it. Some people who fail throw their hands up in the air and walk away, looking at the failure as a bad dream not to be revisited. Others learn from their mistakes and try to do it better in the next time. I believe that's the wisdom the Bible teaches us. Mistakes and failures are painful when they happen. But years later, this collection of mistakes and failure should be called experience. A successful person will see failures in their journey toward success as just another step in life's journey and learn from these. They know their mindset is at the heart of their success and failure. And wisdom in the Bible teaches us. Faith in God gives us power to change our mindset and overcome our fear of facing our mistakes and failures. If we never fail, our courage does not increase. In God, we get comfortable with practicing and making mistakes. Bible gets comfortable talking about the failures of people of faith. When we hide from our failures, we will never learn from them. We'll never give a chance to ourselves to see where and how God works for us. That will be our real failure. Only people in faith can keep failing because they always try. They can forgive others because they are forgiven. Life is constantly changing. Things will go wrong and life will go on. You cannot change your past or hard to predict the future. But what you can do is stop clinging to the past or worrying about what might happen in the future. And all of us are called to trust God, trust God's love and good intention toward us. And I believe God empowers each of us to overcome our mistakes and failures and find new hope. And faith in God shows us alternative way people cannot see. This sermon series is continued. We'll learn more from the stories of failure. Stay tuned.